All right. Welcome, team. It's 14th of May. All right, this is a deep dive, Thursday deep dive by Code Mentoring into TypeScript and, sorry, not TypeScript, into GraphQL. A couple of slides here that I'm going to run through with you guys. I think pretty much everyone here has heard of us, so I'm not going to give a big spiel, but there's just some links here. If you're new to us, definitely join the Slack we got going. But I think pretty much everyone here is on, which is good. So I'll skip over that. Cool. So who's heard of REST before? Right. REST is kind of this way where a lot of people do the APIs using, you request a resource. Maybe it's API/v1/users or something like that. You're getting a list of these users. But there's a problem with it, right? And that's kind of where this GraphQL sits in. And a lot of people are actually saying that REST is dying. So if you'll forgive the poor dad joke. There's kind of two things I wanted to focus on today. There's so many benefits of GraphQL, but I want to focus on these two today. So one of the best ones is picking what you want. When you're requesting something in REST, you can basically only get whatever it's saying. Yeah. So if you request a user, you get all the details of that user. If you're requesting I don't know, I work for a music company. So if I'm requesting a song, I can only get all the details of the song. I don't have the ability to pick and choose. Whereas with GraphQL, it's kind of like going down the shopping mall and picking off individual things. So that's the first benefit that I really like about GraphQL. The second one is knowing what you're going to get back. Right. So with REST, there's no real typings or a way of knowing unless you go through the documentation. But if you're using something like TypeScript to interact with the REST API, right, you actually have no idea what you're going to get back. So you have to manually create all these types yourself. Whereas in GraphQL, right, it's and I'll show you guys this today. It actually tells you explicitly this is what we're going to return. And it has things like type checking of arguments and things that you pass in, a whole bunch of stuff like that. So it's a really powerful framework, especially when used with something like TypeScript, which is what we're going to jump into today. So any questions on why we'd want to use GraphQL? I'm going to show you guys the deep dive. I'm going to jump into that in a second. But just any before we jump in, is there any questions you guys have around?
So Tristan.
Yeah.
Based on what you said, so basically with REST, one of the things we do is whenever we get data, then we have some logic that we use to filter what we need, right?
On the front end,
yeah. Yeah, so that part gets eliminated once we start using
completely. GraphQL. So you're able to go through, instead of having all this stuff, right? They have to manually sit through, and you end up looking like her, right? You can actually walk down the shopping mall and say, I want this one and this one and this one, and you're a lot happier as a result. And it's also much better for the client because then if you're on a mobile, right, you don't want to be downloading all this data. You don't actually get an option in REST, but in GraphQL you can say I only want to grab the ID. Let's say you want to get a big list of users, right? You don't want to grab all their profile pictures and emails and all that. You just want to get a list of them. You can just pick out the ID, and I'm going to show you guys how to do that kind of stuff today. So yes, good question. Any other questions before we jump into how we do this? Cool. So as always, today is a code along. I highly encourage you guys to pull out your text editor. I'm going to assume you guys have some already basic knowledge of VS Code or NPM and various things like that. So I'm not going to go into explaining that today. So I'm going to load up my editor. You guys can see this okay? Cool. So I'm going to go through, and the first thing I'm going to install is a module called GraphQL. Just going to yarn add GraphQL. Great. So we've spun up a little npm package here. Just going to go ahead and add the git ignore. Node modules and the yarn lock. Okay. So I'm also going to install TypeScript because that's what we're working with today. Yarn add TypeScript. And then for those who don't actually know TS Node, I'm going to install that as well. So TS Node is a way of essentially running TypeScript without building it beforehand. So just those two things there, TypeScript and TS Node. I will ask whoever is not muted to please mute yourself, just for a keyboard. It's quite noisy. Okay, so we're going to go into the source. All right, create an index.ts file. Now I've actually got some stuff that I prepared a little earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this. So let's break down what I've got here. Right. First thing I'm going to do, and I'll actually paste this in Slack channel for you guys. Let's use the JavaScript Advanced. It's a little slow today. So this is that TypeScript file that I'm working with. It's the first one. So I'm just going to comment this out, and we'll uncomment it as we go. So the first thing I'm going to do is import GraphQL and schema. Right, what is a schema? Does anybody know what a schema is? Can anybody tell me what a schema is? Just generally, it doesn't have to be specific to GraphQL.
It's like how the data will look like, the structure.
Yeah, it's kind of a blueprint of your data. Now remember, we were saying in the second feature, right? You're knowing what you're going to get back. So TypeScript is, GraphQL is typed. It's very specific, and that's where the schema comes in. It becomes very, very helpful to construct this. So let's actually see how we'll go ahead and create a schema, right? So we're going to use this build schema function that we imported here. Right? Now inside here, this is actually using, I think it's schema definition language. It's essentially GraphQL's way of defining what entities, what things are going to live inside our API. So you can see here we've got a type query, type person. I can go ahead and define another type if I want to, right? Type foobar. Now on here, if you guys are familiar with TypeScript, I can actually define some properties. So I can say like name. All right, we'll set that to a string. All right, we can have maybe, let's set it to a person, make it a little bit less abstract. What have we got person? Why don't we say vehicle? All right, so I'll have a type, a string. We might have a color, also make that a string. We might have the year that it was made. We'll make this a date. Right, so TypeScript, GraphQL has some built-in types for us. You guys can have a look through those, but some of the main ones are strings, integers. You can have a Boolean. So you might have like a expired. Right? And set that to a Boolean. If you want to make something required inside a type, you add an exclamation mark to it, like that. And then if you want to make something a array, you can put it inside arrays like that. So it's just angle brackets. So this is very familiar to the TypeScript way of defining classes, right, and entities and types. So you'll start to see how these things play together really nicely with TypeScript. Now, I'm just going to delete this. We have this type, this query type that we've got here. What do we think this is? Anybody have any guesses? We've got this type person. This kind of makes sense. That's something we're defining ourselves. You can also add comments. All right, so custom type. Okay. But what do we think this type is here? Any guesses? So this is actually an inbuilt type into GraphQL. So in GraphQL, you have two main things that you're going to do. You're going to query something, right, which is kind of akin in REST to a GET, right? A GET request. And the second thing we do is we have a mutation. We'll often pass things into mutation as arguments. You can do the same for query too. You can pass in arguments. And a mutation is akin to a post request inside the standard REST, right? So this type here defines what queries are going to live inside of our API. So let's keep it really simple for now. Let's just say hello, and we're going to expect hello to return a string. Right? I'm actually going to remove the person as well, so we'll keep it really, really basic. So we've just got this query, hello string. So this here is akin to an individual API endpoint in REST, right? So this might be, for example, your /API/v1/hello. So that's kind of the parallel between GraphQL and REST. So how do we actually set this up? Right? Well, GraphQL has this thing called the root. Now this is the resolver. Right? When somebody comes in and actually requests something, right, in GraphQL, requests a query, does a query on the hello, we have to actually tell GraphQL how to handle that. So that's what this root is doing. It's simply just an object with all of the queries and mutations that you're going to return. So here you can see hello is a function that returns a string. It's expecting it to return a string, like this. So we've got this here. So this is setting up the how GraphQL is going to handle it. This is defining what is available. And the third part that we have to do is specify what an example query. So in this case, let's do a really basic one. We'll just do that hello. So query hello. Now, here is a really cool thing about GraphQL that's different to REST. You can actually do multiple queries and mutations in a single request to the server. So for example, if I had another function saying goodbye, like this, I can actually also request that here, like goodbye, which is pretty cool, right? So normally in REST, you have to make two separate requests for this. Right? Both of these queries would require two separate requests. But in GraphQL, you can actually package it together into one query. Who thinks that's pretty cool? So before we stitch this all together, do you have any questions on how we define types, how we define the resolvers, or how we do querying? I know I'm going over a lot of content here, but I want to slowly start to expand upon these concepts. But these are the three root parts.
Tristan, how this resolver is tying up with the schema above? I'm confused about that.
So that's the last part down here. We're going to stitch it together.
Oh, okay.
Right. So in here, right, so we're importing the build schema, which generates this schema here, GraphQL schema. And then what we do is we query it with this GraphQL function. The GraphQL function takes the schema, right, that we built here with all the types, right? It takes the query. So what are we going to ask on that query, on that schema? So that's how this gets paired to this. And then the last thing we're going to do is handle the resolvers. So this is what GraphQL will call internally, so that when we request hello, it calls this function. When we request goodbye, it calls this function here. So they're the three things that are needed, and then you stitch them together with this. Make sense? Does that answer your question, Rashad?
Yes, Tristan. Thanks.
Cool. So I'm just going to comment that. I'll get rid of that goodbye for now. All right. So this is actually going to run this query for us. All right, so let's actually go ahead and try this. So I'm going to go yarn ts node, all right, and then just pass the path of that file. So source index. That's going to run that for us automatically. Probably need to create a ts config file. Let me just copy that. Give this to you guys as well. That's the ts config. All right. So it looks like it's working. I don't know if you guys can see that, but we've got some stuff back. All right, we've got this data. All right, hello is returning hello. So why don't we log this out more specifically? All right, data. So GraphQL by default will always return the data attribute, and that will kind of return, that will contain all of the queries and mutations that you've got. So in this case, it's going to be query.data, and then the name of the query that we ran. In this case, it's hello. Okay. Now we know, as we defined here, I'm just going to move on to a new line to make it a little easier to read. We know that this hello query is going to return a string. So we expect, right, result.data.hello to be a string. So let's try it again. And there you go. So just to recap on these three concepts that we have, we're defining the schema. Now we can define custom types like we saw with the person, and we'll get into that later. Remember, it has to run on the root. So there's two built-in ones. There's the type mutations, which is like the posts, and there's the type query, which is kind of the equivalent of a GET request in REST. Now, on those, you define your queries in here and the mutations inside the mutations type. All right, let's do these mutations, but we'll do it a little bit later. So, any questions on anything I've covered so far?
Yeah, Tristan. So goodbye will only work once you specify it in the schema, right?
Good question. Let's try and query for it now. All right, so we've set up the hello. So let's try and query for goodbye without specifying it inside the schema. Let's see what happens. Okay. Let me have a look. It's a strange looking error. Usually you don't interact with GraphQL at this level, but I'm pretty sure that error is, let me just load this up. See if we can catch the error. Expected name. Perhaps not. I think what's happening here, it might be this type. Remove that. Yeah, there we go. So we can see this error here, right? Cannot query field goodbye on type query. What does that mean? Well, remember how we defined our queries here? It's saying it can't find this goodbye query on this type. It doesn't exist yet. We haven't specified it. So automatically, right, GraphQL is saying, hey, I don't know how to handle this. I don't know what goodbye is. You haven't told me what this is. So straight out of the box, we're getting some really good type checking. So to address what Rajat was saying, right, will it work? Not unless we add it in. Now let's try and break it again, but in a different way. Right, let's say goodbye is going to return an integer. All right, let's see what happens now. Okay, so we get another, as we expect, we get another error message saying int because we specified int here. Int cannot be represented as a non-integer value goodbye. Right, see how we're returning goodbye from this query? So it's automatically saying, hey, I'm expecting a number to come back from this, but you gave me, from the resolver, you gave me a string. You can't do this. It says you can't, it gives you this big error. Right? And here's another cool thing you might notice. It gives you the errors, but it actually resolved hello. So one of the nice parts about GraphQL is that it handles each of these queries and mutations separately. So hello worked well, but in goodbye, it returned null because it had an error. So this is actually pretty nice. You can get really specific with the queries and bundling things together. It's much more resource efficient than the standard REST call. So who's excited about this? Who's starting to see some of the power behind GraphQL? Are there any questions on anything we've covered so far around how the resolvers link up to the schema and how we query these things together? All right. So let's turn that back to a string. Right. Let's set that as a required. All right. Well, remember we can do this with the exclamation mark. So what happens if we return null from this? Right? This might happen. So typically, right, these resolvers would have your database calls in them. So you'd have like db dot, get users, right? Return this. So you can actually return promises from resolvers, which is really nice. And GraphQL will handle that for you. So in this case, right, we're saying goodbye is required with this exclamation mark. So what happens if we return null? See what happens. I expect we'll get a very similar issue to what we had before. I cannot return a null for a non-nullable field. So if I take that off, that exclamation mark, that will technically work. So even though, yep, so that's worked. Hello and goodbye is set to null. So GraphQL is quite flexible with how you can return non-nullable fields or nullable. So in this case, most of the time, you probably want to have the exclamation mark added to make sure that you have to return something from this. So that's how you require something. Any questions on requirements or how you're handling nulls?
Yeah, so Tristan, in this case, even if we didn't specify like required, won't it return an error because it's expecting string type and we are passing null?
No. So that's the beauty of GraphQL. It's saying if it's nullable by default. So by not having those exclamation marks there, you're actually able to pass to return nothing from this. So you have to manually declare it with the exclamation mark as required. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So what if we want to actually return something a little bit more complicated than just a string or a number? This is where we start getting into the custom types. So let's go ahead and define a type of person, just like we do in TypeScript. Let's say the person has a name, which is a string, and it has an age, which is a number. Let's say, which is also required. So both of these fields are required. Now, we're going to add a new query. Let's call this query me, right, to get me, which is a very common thing to do. Now, instead of returning a string or an int, what we can do now is we can actually refer to this custom type that we added just below. So we add person, and we want that to be required, so we add the exclamation mark. And now let's come down here and query the me. Okay. Who can tell me what this error means? I'll read that. It says, field me of type person must have a selection of subfields. What does that mean?
Is it because you didn't fill in the name and the other field?
So remember, if we go back to our point, pick what you want. So this error is saying, hey, we don't work like we do in REST, where we just give you everything. You have to manually decide what to pick out. So that's what we have to do here. Now, the way we do this in GraphQL, and this is where GraphQL becomes very powerful, is this concept of nesting. So in here, right, this is now the type of person. So we can select the name and the age. So let's just select the name. All right, let's see if this works. Okay, who can tell me what this error means?
Well, you still have goodbye as null, right?
Yep. Yep, that's the one. Null.
And you have the exclamation point?
So set that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so set that, fix that on goodbye.
Name is required and it's null at the moment.
Right. So you cannot return null for non-nullable field query.me. So in this case, all right, remember the resolvers in the root? Right. We haven't actually told GraphQL how to do the me query yet. So let's go ahead and add this. All right, so now GraphQL knows how to handle this here. Let's try it again. Boom. Now we're cooking with gas. Right? We've got the hello and the goodbye. Right? And this me object with the name. We've only grabbed the name. Right? We have not grabbed the age. So that is the power of GraphQL, is you can pick individual things. So we're starting to see how this is coming together now with more complex types. Right? I wonder what, for those who have had a little bit of experience, particularly those in the project CM, right, you'll start to see the custom types that we've developed. This is how it all stitches together. And now these types are nestable. All right, so let's say we have, say, a type, a vehicle, that we had before, right? Which has let's say it's the type, which is a string, and we have color, which is also a string. Right? Now in here, we can actually nest it even further. We can say vehicle, right, is going to be a type of vehicle. Now we'll make it non-required because not everyone has a car. Okay. Now watch this. All right. I can actually come in here and go use the same. We called it vehicle. Well, let's call it drives. Drives vehicle. All right. So drives. Then inside drives. Right now, inside this is a type of what? It's type vehicle. So we can grab the type and the color. Let's just say we just want to get the color. Right? We want to know what my name is and what colored car I drive. So let's run this. Okay. So the first thing we notice is that the drives is set to null. And it didn't fail. The reason why is because we said it's not required, because not everybody has a car. So let's give Bruce Wayne a car. Say, Yeah, we'll do it this way. Drives. Then we'll say type, right, Batmobile. Right, the color is obviously black, because that's the only fashion choice that he seems to have. And there we go. So we can't just see that, but if I expand that out, data dot what is it? Name drives. There you go. Just so you guys can see that object. And there you go. Getting the color black. If we want to grab the type, we can do that too. In fact, what I might do is JSON.stringify to make it a little bit easier to read. Let's see all the data we're getting back now. There you go. So you're starting to see how we can start stitching things together. Right? So, curious team, what do we notice about this? What questions do we have? How do we feel about this in contrast to standard REST API? I want to know what you guys think so far.
I have a question. So let's say in the query you had, let's say, 50 fields, and you wanted to show all of them. Would you have to write them all out?
Yes.
Okay. So there's no
yes,
like
you do.
Get all or.
I don't think so. I don't. Let me check. GraphQL get all properties of type. I don't think there is. Like a wildcard kind of thing. I don't think that exists. You can probably read up on it as to why. It seems to be a pretty highly requested feature. One thing I will say that you can do is you can have fragments. So if you've got, say you've got a user entity, that's obviously used by a lot of places. You can use a spread operator. So you can declare it once, and then you can use a spread operator inside GraphQL in multiple places too. So you don't have to run it out each time. So that's probably more advanced stuff that we can get into a little bit later if we have time. Yeah, that is, I suppose, one of the small limitations is you have to manually and explicitly say, this is what I want to get back. GraphQL is very picky and finicky with that. But I
know.
Yep.
Since it's making multiple queries, is it like doing it in one trip, or is it making one trip after another?
Yeah, it's one trip. So it's one REST call. So one thing to keep in mind, right? This is still technically a like HTTP call. Right? It's not using webs like a WebSockets thing. Like there are WebSockets available for GraphQL, but this is still technically a post request. It's just the format of how you do it, and it's a different way of thinking about how you do post requests in comparison to standard RESTful APIs. But it is, yes, it is one trip, which is pretty cool. You get some pretty great optimizations. What else, team? Before we jump into some more stuff, what else do you guys think? Cool. Okay, so what else did I have planned for you guys? So we can integrate this into Express. GraphQL works across. GraphQL is not specific to Node.js. It's actually developed by Facebook, and is really applicable to pretty much anything, any backend framework or language. because all GraphQL is a way of interacting with your API. So, you know, whether it's Python, whether it's .NET, you know, it all has a the same format, that you're just talking between the API and the client. That's all GraphQL is. So we're gonna jump into using Express for this. Build out a little Express application. So call this Express.ts. So I'm going to use the Express GraphQL package and also the Express package. So yarn add Express GraphQL and Express. Okay. I'm going to import those. Import Express from Express. All right. GraphQL HTTP. And don't worry, I'll post this code up in a second. All right. So we're going to use the same schema and resolvers that we have here. All right, so we're going to import these. All right. So we're going to have that root, and we're also going to have the schema. So this is how, all right, instead of stitching it all together like we were doing manually down here. Let's see how this is manually set up, and we're querying it specifically and directly. That's not very useful, because we actually want to host this as an API that we can talk to. So that's what this Express GraphQL library does for us. So I think I need to add the types for Express. Yarn add hd types Express. If you're not using TypeScript, don't worry about that. Okay, so we set up a little Express app like this. We've got a middleware, so app.use. Now, typically it's under /GraphQL. That's typically where your GraphQL will live. And then we simply use this middleware. So it's very similar to what we saw here, right, with the schema and the query and the root. But this time, obviously, we're not gonna have the query, because we're asking the user or whoever's talking to the API to provide that query. So all we need is the schema and the root value. Now you'll notice I've got something else here called this GraphIQL. All right, let me show you what this is. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. Yarn ts node. I'm going to go with the Express one now. Already got something running on port 4000. Just update that. Okay, so we should have now this GraphQL endpoint that we can talk to. So let's go ahead and load that in the browser. Localhost 4000/GraphQL. Boom. So what is this? How do we get here? Well, this GraphQL Express package provides this GraphIQL already built in. So that's what this tool is. So if we click on this, right, we start to explore what this looks like. This is what we were doing here with this query. So I can actually go ahead and copy this query and paste it in here. Exactly. Right, so that's doing the exact same thing, except now instead of doing it programmatically, we're doing it when we request it. So if we press the play button, there we go. I'll zoom in a little bit so you guys can see. So this is exactly what we were doing, but now it's live. So I can come in and come in here and comment this out, for example. All right. I think it even has auto completion for us. So if you press Control Space, it actually tells you what properties are available, which is really nice. You can kind of auto complete your way through somebody else's API. So you don't have to go and read API documentation. You can just go, all right, let's start from the beginning, start from the top. All right, what queries are available? Instantly it tells you. Now, if you don't want to go through this stuff, look what else we've got. All right, root type is the query. So remember what, on our schema, we defined the query, the two root types, the query and the mutation. So we're going to query, and look, it's already telling us what queries are available. And it tells us what it returns too. Who thinks that's pretty cool? All right, so you don't have to go through and read, say for example, who has a big, Stripe probably has a big one. api.stripe.com. So we go to the documentation. Right, developers, documentation, full API reference. Right, so if you want to find something inside Stripe's documentation or something, you have to go through and look through every single one of the things, authentication, right? Let's just choose a random thing, like, look at all this stuff. You don't get to choose what you get back. Let's just say you want to get one thing, right, the currency or something. But you don't get that opportunity. You have to grab everything. It's like what we were saying before with the what you get to choose, right? So that's kind of the benefit of having this. Where are we? This guy here is you can automatically know what is available. Let's say we go into the person. It even tells us on the types individually, like nested types. Click on vehicle. Right, so you can actually explore the API interactively, which is really, really cool. And if you've got a very big graph, a very big GraphQL, which is what we're starting to experience now with Project CM, right? This is a really, really useful tool to start exploring how your GraphQL will look like and what it will return. So, who thinks that's pretty cool? There's one more thing I want to cover tonight, which is actually passing in data. But before I do that, any questions on anything we've covered so far?
So we use Apollo GraphQL in the project CM. So what's the difference between Express GraphQL and Apollo GraphQL?
That's a great question. So Apollo is meant to be an end-to-end tool. So let's just have a look. Apollo GraphQL. How do they call themselves? So they're kind of a, yeah, to Apollo Graph. They're a way of handling. I think Apollo uses Express GraphQL under the hood. Right, this is a really common library, this Express GraphQL. Apollo does a few other things around handling of errors, wrapping data and things like that. And it's really good for React, because on the React side, you have to query all this stuff, right? So Apollo provides some excellent interfaces to talk to your API instead of handling it through standard, fetch requests. So to answer your question, I think it was Tomoe who asked that. They work together. I'm pretty sure Apollo uses Express GraphQL under the hood. But that is a good question. I think Apollo is probably a bit out of scope for tonight, because there's a lot of things involved with this. But yeah, that's a good question. Any other questions on anything we've covered so far before I jump into?
I'm wondering, how would you query this from like another client, like a normal REST capable client?
A normal what, sorry?
A normal like REST capable client, or how do you query it from like a, let's say, form or something?
Great question. Yep. So from a form, I don't think you do a form. You usually do a post.
Sorry, I meant like mobile app or something.
Yeah. So all of GraphQL under the hood is doing this. right? It's a post request. In fact, if I set this to curl, is it gonna work? No. So it's a post request. It's usually GraphQL, right? And then the data you're going to send, this is what it's doing under the hood. Is you have the query, which is a string. So that would be this as a string. Like that. And if you're not passing any variables in through mutation, that's all you do.
Okay. That's it. So
you can anything that makes a standard call, a REST call, can do this.
Okay. Cool. Thanks.
In fact, I'm pretty sure you can even do it with a GET request, right? GraphQL. I don't recommend this. Right, and then in the query string, you can go query equals, and the same thing. Then you have to encode that with the right whatnot, but that you can also do it this way as well.
Okay, cool, thanks.
No worries. Good questions, guys. Any other questions before we jump into sending data? Cool. So let's look into how we create a mutation. So how is a mutation a little different to the query? So as we saw here, when we first started talking about it, a query is kind of a GET request. You're retrieving information. A mutation typically is when you're sending information, like if you're creating a user. So why don't we go ahead and say this user's, all right, we'll set this to an object. Just a little temporary state. Users equals. We'll return this. Just a little object. All right. Return users 0. Let's say we want to actually create a user. Right. How do we go about doing this? Well, let's say create user. Like this. It's going to be the user. We'll type this for now. We'll just type it as any. I'm going to go users.push. Right, user. This new user that we've created. So we're just going to add to this. We're going to add to this array, and then we'll also return that user. Now we need to actually define what this looks like in our schema, don't we? So in this case, it's going to be type mutation, and then we're going to have create user. Now let me just look up the exact syntax for this, because typically we use type GraphQL, which handles some of this stuff for us. Where are we? Mutation. Try and find it in their docs. This is what it looks like when you're querying. I'm trying to find the schema definition for mutation. GQL define mutation and schema. Might just be as simple as that. Okay, let's try that then. Mutation. Where is it? What I can do actually is look this up in, so under our project CM, which I think most of you guys are involved with, we actually have the type GraphQL, sorry, the GraphQL definitions automatically building for us. So if you go onto API, I think it's under dist types.ts. So all these types are automatically generated for us, which is pretty cool. Maybe it's not there. That's fine. Let's just try and work it out manually. I'm pretty sure it's with this here, and then you return the person. Right? The argument is say user. That's going to be the person type. Now this is going to be required, and this is also going to be required. Okay. So let's just try this and see if it works. See what happens. We might go a little bit over time today, team, if that's okay, just because there's a lot of things to cover in this one. Okay, so let's go back to our iGraphQL. Now, by default, right, this is a query, so we're going to change this over to a mutation. And we'll try and do some autocompletes. Okay, it doesn't look like that's working. Just bear with me, team, while I try and work this out. I think if we do this, this should work. Just got to work out how to pass that argument in, and we should be good to go. So refresh this. Yep. So we've got this create user. We've just got to work out how to define the arguments. Argument for mutation. Mutation. Okay, so that does look correct. So there is a difference in GraphQL between input and output. So in this case, right, let's just say, I think I was correct in doing this. So let's just say it takes in a name of a string required. Right? Now these types are actually output types. They're things that they're requesting back. In GraphQL, you actually have a different, I'm pretty sure it's under input. So we'll say input type create person, or person input. You typically do this, right? So this is your output type. This is your input type. So in here we'll say, instead of, I think before the reason why it wasn't working is we had the output type. That doesn't work. Right? So what we actually have to do is define it as the input type, like this. So see if this works, then I'll paste that code up for you. Okay, looks to be good. I'll refresh this, we should see mutation. There we go. Okay, so I'll just post this up for you guys. Actually, I'll edit the one that currently exists. This one here. There you go. So just to recap, right? We have what we're returning back. So we can see when we create a user, we want to return what we're creating. But what we're putting in these arguments, right, this is not the same type as what we're getting back out. So GraphQL, again, wants you to get specific and say, can you please create different types? We define this with type person is the output type, and then input person input. Right, so this defines something that we're putting into the GraphQL. Any questions on input or output and how that relates to what we're about to do? Cool. So we've got this create user, takes in a parameter of user, which is a required person input. And that relates to this down here. All right, so we've got this user. Right now we're just typing it as any. Let's just log this, right? Log. And this user corresponds exactly to what we're passing in here. So let's see if this works. Come back over to our GraphQL, create user. Right. Now, you might not want to put all the details in here, right? For this user, you got the name. Let's just say Joker. Age, say 40. Right. We want to get back the name and the age. Right. So this didn't work. You can see here. So here's the thing about GraphQL parameters, right? The order, the order actually doesn't matter because everything is prefixed with a key. Right, so you're actually passing in a key of objects or a named parameters. So in this case, where we were here, selecting the user like this parameter doesn't work. This is more akin to this, right? Arguments. Or args, let's just say args. And then in here, args.user. Right, that's actually more accurate. As you can see with what we're getting back here. Let's try that again. All right, now it's working. So this is what a mutation looks like. Just to recap, we put it under the different type. Right, because remember, there's two main types: there's query and mutation. They're the root types in GraphQL. We create a function like this. Looks like a function like you declare in TypeScript. We pass in a named parameter. Right? We have a different input type than we do for the output type, specified by the input, like this. And then we return something. It's very similar to the concept of a query. We're just passing in some extra stuff. And then in the resolver itself, this is what we call the resolvers. Right? We get the named arguments, and we're just pushing that onto the user array that we got here. So any questions on anything we've covered so far? I might wrap it up here for today. There's a lot more that we could talk about with GraphQL. I've only kind of just scratched the surface. But I'm curious, how we thought about this. What are some things you guys want to know about this? Is there any questions you guys have? Anything you guys see yourself using this for your personal projects?
I like how closely knitted with TypeScript this is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Is there a linter for the literals? Or
There
like
is. So I think there is, yeah. In this case, I'm pretty sure if I install an extra package called GraphQL tag, I don't know how to check this. yarn add GraphQL tag, GQL. Apologies if this doesn't work. We'll just see. So instead of passing it as a big object like this, I'm pretty sure you can pass in GQL. And then maybe not. But there is a way to do it, as you're kind of seeing here. So that's all syntax highlighted. Is that what you meant?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And error checking, like if you just type something wrong or something.
Error checking. I don't know if it does. That's kind of what these live tools are here for.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if that resolution happens inside VS Code. It's very easy to spin it up yourself and run it here.
All right.
Yeah, just gonna undo that for now. But yeah, good question. Any other questions? Who actually coded along with this? Who actually got some of this working?
Well, I did.
Come back over here. Yeah. So what do I need to know, team? How was that?
It's good.
Yeah. Was it useful? Does it help with some of the stuff we've been doing with Project CM?
Yeah, it for me cleared up a lot. I mean, I still need to do more deep dive into it.